The night lay low on the Blackwater, a damp shawl of fog that smelled of pitch and wet rope and old fish. The river ran slow and heavy with tide, whispering under the harbor's wooden teeth, and lanterns burned with the smothered glow of coals cupped in palms. A skiff slipped through the dark like a thought no one dared speak aloud, oars dipping with so soft a rhythm that even the rats upon the pilings did not startle. Davos Seaworth kept his weight forward, his hands knowing the oars as they knew the bones of his own fingers, shorter than they had once been, thanks to the man now crouched in the stern. He did not look back at Stannis Baratheon, whose presence was an iron along Davos's spine, nor at Lord Eddard Stark, whose eyes had something of the north in them even in this choking southern fog. Davos had seen the manner of men in 100 ports and markets, smugglers and lords alike. Honor glowed in Stark as clearly as lantern light through glass. Stannis's honor was the lantern itself, hot and closed and perilous to touch. "Pace," Davos muttered softly to the boy at the bow, who breathed as if each inhale were a debt. "Be a fish, not a gull. Fish don't call their own doom." A grunt from Stannis, no sightless order but acknowledgement of expertise, as it always was. Stannis had no love for Davos's trade, but he valued a man for what he could do. Davos had long ago learned that was the nearest thing to love Stannis afforded the living. Ned Stark's head was bare to the mist. He had refused the hood Davos offered, murmuring something about knowing the air, which was a northern notion if Davos had ever heard one. Ned Stark looked like a man still healing. Word on the docks told of an ambush in a narrow street. Brave men dead, the hand brought low. Davos had seen the limp when they boarded Black Betha at dusk, an unsteady favoring of the left leg, and the prudence with which the hand had come to the river in a common cloak without sigil or guard. Prudence and desperation made a good partnership when one needed to do bold and stupid things and live to boast of them at a fire. They did not aim their skiff at the pier lights. Those were for guards and drunks and honest sailors bound to be searched, for those with permits and writs and names writ up in ledgers. Davos steered for the shadowed bellies of the war galleys, the sleek low hulls with their pine-oiled sides and banks of furled oars. The royal fleet slept in the harbor, trusting the name upon their flags. The crowned stag on gold had hung there a long time. Men forgot that banners were promises and promises could be broken by those who had made them if law and blood demanded a new weaving. Black Betha's crew moved in fours, like fingers curling toward a fist. Dale and Allard had taken 2 other boats, men that Davos trusted as he trusted tide and star, and under the fog the boats scattered, slowing, listening, nudging like eels among pilings. Davos could see the first galley now, a looming black that drank the weak lantern glow, her name in flaking gilt along her prow, unreadable in this murk. The harbor master had sent his watch past midnight. Davos had seen the pattern for nights. 3 men at the nearest pier, 2 more at the shack by the hoist, 1 or 2 yawning atop the nearest forecastle. Men grew soft with a paid name to shelter behind. Stannis had seen it too, and his tight mouth had only gone tighter. The fleet was a weapon. The wrong hands held it. That was all for Stannis. The rest, the fog, the men, the rope, the sound was Davos's. Lord Eddard was the question between them, full of words no one had time for. At those last few heartbeats before men became different creatures because steel left its scabbard, Ned Stark said, "Lo, the voice of a man used to command without shouting. No killing we do not need. These are the king's men, and the king is dead. They will serve another king tomorrow. Let us leave them alive enough to do it." "The king is dead," Stannis said, with neither sorrow nor triumph. "We will not be. Row." They ghosted under the war galley's oars. Davos made the signal with 2 fingers, now, and the boy at the bow froze the skiff on a slick of soundless water. A hook arced, line whispered, would bit with a whispered thock. Davos had taught the lads to wrap their elbows, to take the strain along the arm and not the shoulder, to pull as if tugging a fish away from reef, slow and smooth. The skiff nosed the hull. Hands and feet found purchase. Davos went up and over as if the ship herself had grown him. Stannis came after with a clipped economy that turned muscle into intention. Eddard Stark climbed like a soldier. Davos had more than once smuggled a knight out of port drunker than a sailor on his name day, and he had learned what men were by watching them move where their foot might slip. The hand moved like a man who did not trust the planks beneath him and would not curse them if he fell, only bear the shame quietly. Davos's heart softened toward him for it, though the knight had no room for that. A sleeping shape on the deck turned its head. Davos's hand cupped the man's mouth, and Allard, who had come up like a shadow from the other side, pressed a blade to the throat without drawing it across. "It's the king's business," Davos breathed into the sailor's ear. "Keep your life by keeping your tongue." A muffled nod, eyes white, breath ragged against Davos's palm. He let go and left the lad to his terror, moving toward the masts. Lines lived in his hands. In another life he would have been a rigger, and in this one he knew how to loose canvas without a creak on a wind that had gone to ground. Behind him, Stannis crossed the deck to the captain's cabin, kicked the latch, and went in with the iron surety of a smith measuring a bar. Ned Stark took the gangway, and a whisper of steel there told Davos the hand was taking another throat of alarm into muteness, backing it with a promise of mercy in that quiet northern way. The ship woke badly, as ships do under strangers. Her timbers groaned a question in her bones. Davos spared a glance to the pier. No alarm yet. He put boys to lines and men to oars through the ports and made them hold until the other boats had found their own ships, black hulks half-eaten by night. Dale's soft whistle came thrice from far off starboard, then Allad's once, then another faint chittering from beyond the second row. Mathos had done his father proud. Davos waited until he counted 6 galleys with ghosts upon them and shapes at their oarports before he hissed, "Cast off." In a voice that felt too loud, ropes hit water like snakes, and the first oars dipped as quietly as they could in a sloshing world. Davos put his shoulder to the work, felt the old ache sing in his scarred fingers, watched the prow take a breath of river. That first motion of a stolen ship was always a kind of sin and a kind of prayer. He could feel Stannis behind him at the rail, counting the lives settling on his shoulders. He could feel Ned Stark watching the eastern sky, not for dawn, not for salvation, but for the hour at which difficult choices became harder to undo. When the first shout went up, it was thin and disbelieving. "Oi! What?" The voice broke on the fog as the prow of the galley kissed the world beyond her berth, as the oar banks took the strain, as the long, lean body of the ship sighed out of sleep. Then there were other shouts, rougher ones, the clatter of boot heels, a bell that pealed with a sick old clangor, too far away to matter and close enough to carry. "We don't have until dawn," Davos said to no one and everyone. Stannis's mouth made a line. "We have until men decide what they are," he said, and went to the quarterdeck with a drawn blade that he did not like and would use with clean purpose. Men decided quickly under fog and fear. The sailors on their decks reached for weapons and stepped back when they saw who held theirs. The guards at the pier ran toward the sound and hesitated at the sight of so many shadows moving in more shadows. Some men threw lines, some cut them, some prayed, some cursed. Davos had seen it in every port. A man doesn't know if he is a brave man until someone else's iron tells him so. Ned Stark crossed to the captured helmsman, laid his hand upon the man's shoulder, and said quietly, "Servants of the king do not drown the realm to prove their loyalty. Stand aside and keep your breath. This ship will serve the rightful heir by morning, and her captain will keep his peacetime berth if he keeps his men from foolishness tonight." The helmsman's eyes flicked to the great dark behind the hand and found Stannis there, iron-shouldered and unavoidable. The man swallowed and stepped away from his wheel. Oars rose and fell. Another bell answered the first, nearer now with a better throat. The dockside watch was awake, and a horn bleated like a dying ewe. With the care of a surgeon's first cut, Davos sent the galley past a packed cluster of fishing cogs and into the teeth of the current. A shape detached itself from the fog, a second galley with a beacon at her bow. Her prow was a wolf's head carved with more pride than skill.
"Men er her rails," shouted.
A rope flew. Stannis caught it one-handed and hauled the other vessel close enough for murmured orders to jump from deck to deck. Another boat ghosted by, Dale's voice carried up, made of salt and nerve. "We have her, father. The captain's asleep in his wine, and the men will follow wages. 2 more behind her. Bring them all out into the middle," Davos said.
"No ramming, no shouting, no bravado."
"Let the fog do what we cannot." But bravado belonged to someone, always. A city is a creature with too many heads. One of them always wants to bite. The next bell ran through the harbor like a thread of iron. Then a new sound answered it from the hill crowned by the Red Keep. The high bell of the Great September of Baelor pealing a broken note, and the dogs along the quays began to bark, and the fog, faithless ally, started to shred somewhere upriver as if dawn had remembered its anointed hour. It would be a thin gray day with a pale belly. Davos made a face at it that he would not waste on a man. "Faster," he said to the deck. "More quiet with it." They got 5 galleys into the current and turned their snouts like hounds toward mid-river. A 6th fetched up against a pier post and complained like a whale alive in the shallows until her oarsmen found their bite. And then she slid loose with a bruised scrape that woke 24 men whose names would never matter. Arrows skittered from shoreside towers, ugly little sounds like murdered birds hitting wood. One stuck in the deck not a hand's breadth from Davos's boot. He did not look down. Then the first real voice of the city found them, the gold cloaks spilling out upon the river gate, men with pikes and torches and authority in their chests. "In the name of the king!" the watch commander cried, and Davos watched men on 3 decks take a breath to listen. "Stand to and bring those ships back to their berths." "In the name of the king!" Stannis returned in a voice like iron ringing, and he did not shout. He did not need to. "The king is Robert Baratheon, dead 3 days. You serve the realm. You will do as the hand commands while the lawful heir makes his graces well known." There was a coughing silence from the gate, the sound of men looking at one another to see who would choose which future. Ned Stark stepped to the rail with the measured caution of a man whose leg hurt. He did not lean upon it. His voice carried without the bell's mockery. "Captain of the city watch, you know me, Eddard of House Stark. I would speak to Janos Slynt. If he is not there, bring me the man who has the right to answer the hand at a gate of King's Landing." He did not add, "I will strike you dead if you do not." He did not need to add anything. He had a way of looking at men that made them remember the weight of their own oaths. The torches shuffled. A horn muttered again. The fog lifted in a damp, sullen sigh over the nearest chain of pilings. A ladder clattered against stone. The watch commander's voice came lower now, aimed at sense instead of performance. "My Lord Hand, Lord Janos is Abed. Lord Peter is not present in the harbor. The Queen is not for the watch to heed," Stannis said, and finally raised his blade, not as threat, but as sigil. "The Queen is a Lannister. The crown belongs to House Baratheon. This fleet belongs to the crown. Bring fire against us, and that will be an answer we shall all understand. Bring reason, and no man who stands there need die. A simple thing from a simple place." Davos felt the shudder of it in the men around him. He thought of onions and the way hunger made a man honest whether he wished to be or not. Eddard Stark took a breath that Davos could see and not hear. "Captain," he said, and made the word so human Davos wanted to be home by a fire in a hovel eating fish with his youngest and not be here stealing galleys under a king's nose. "Hold your men from the docks. Pull them back from the firepots. We will not burn any ship. No sailor need die. At sunrise I will come ashore at this gate with Lord Stannis Baratheon. We will speak. I will bring the writ naming me protector of the realm, written in King Robert's hand. I will bring a book and the truth inside it. No one who listens will be punished for the hearing." He let the words settle like silt. "Do not waste your men. The realm will need them to keep order when this is done." In the pause that answered, a bowman grew brave in the tower and ran his arrow down the deck. Davos flinched away on instinct, feeling the feather brush his sleeve. Stannis did not move. Ned did not blink. The bowman's captain's hand cracked out and cuffed the archer alongside the helm. Davos saw the gesture and learned something else about the city. "We will hold," the watch commander said finally. "For an hour. For 2. No more. My lord Hand. 2 hours, Ned said. 2 hours, Stannis echoed, not as concession but as boundary. And do not call me Lord again when you mean something else. They owned the river in that narrow time like men own a breath, and like a breath it had to be used or lost. Davos sent his boys flying along lines, set decks to quiet order, counted sails and oars and men whose faces were too pale in the thinning mist. He sent Allard to guide the third galley clear of a barge that stuck up from the shallows like a rotten tooth. He sent Dale to look for any night skiffs where braver men might gather their courage. He sent Mathos with rope to lash 3 hulls together stern to stern so their length made a wall. It was a trick a smuggler learned with casks and small boats when king's men came hungry for bribes. Make one thing look like a larger thing. Men respected larger things. Davos had never found it otherwise. We should run, said a voice behind him. Not Stannis, not the Hand, but a lad with freckles and a voice gone home to boyhood by fear. Sail down river and out to sea. Take the ships. Let the Lannisters keep their city. We take the city, Stannis said, overhearing as he overheard everything that mattered. We take it by law or by hunger. We do not leave thieves in charge because they have a high hill upon which to shake their stolen gold. It will take a siege to starve a city this fat, Davos said without looking away from his lines, not to gainsay but because every truth had to be weighed. The red wine fleet sits at the arbor and owes the Tyrells. The Tyrells owe Lord Renly if he asks them for a debt. House Lannister owes good steel to any trouble they make. We have ships, courage, the Hand, your name. We must ask ourselves which makes men leave doors unbarred. I have law, Stannis said. Davos did not laugh. And it ought to be enough. But men are men. Ned Stark stepped to the rail and looked toward the hill that wore the red keep like a crown. Both Baratheon brothers think themselves owed by the realm, he murmured, as if he were telling the river a thing it could not use. Law belongs to Stannis. Renly believes the crown belongs to popularity and peace and whatever else he names his charm. I have no appetite for kings. The last was more private, and Davos looked at him sidelong. But I have appetite enough for duty, the Hand added, and there was Lyanna Stark's ghost in that word, or so men said who liked speaking of dead roses after too much wine. Torchlight licked along the gullet of the river gate and flinched back. The fog had lost heart. It clung in rags to the pilings now and in streaks along the ship's beams where they wept last night's sweat. Dawn made an ugly promise behind the hills. The bells had staggered to an uncertain silence. If the city were a man, it was a man looking out from his bed at a broken morning and not yet willing to ask what had been done in his name while he slept. Davos drew a breath. All right then, banners, he said, and the order traveled deck to deck with the way of a thing men had been waiting to do all night. The stag of Baratheon, the dire wolf of Stark. He had set both by Stannis' order. The black and the gray, stiff with damp, snapping as if made of something that remembered wind better than cloth. When the first flag lifted, the men along the pier sucked their teeth audibly, and somewhere along the Street of Sisters a woman cried out as if she'd dropped a pot upon her foot, surprised and pained by the same shock. It is a hard thing to watch your world choose a shape without asking you. Stannis stood under his stag and seemed less alone and more so at once. Eddard watched the dire wolf climb its spar with an unspoken thanks and more fear than he would show. Davos had set 2 sea-green pennons of dragonstone to the fore, for the name mattered in ports where men had sworn to Stannis for year on year and did not forget where their coin came from. Make fast those 3 hulls, Davos commanded. Turn them so they give their widest bellies to the gate, and keep the oars ready. No need to show our teeth unless someone puts a hand in. He moved like a man in his own bones at last, without thinking that he moved beneath lords. Men were not so different from ships. Give them a role and a plan and the right tensions, and they worked. A boy came barefoot along the planks with a raven in a wicker crate, eyes vibrant with fear and something like hope. The maester's bird, Ser Davos? The boy whispered, shrinking his words as if the air might tell on them. The bird's eyes were brighter than the boy's by far. For the Hand, Davos said, and the boy skittered back to press the crate upon Ned Stark. as if the bird's hard beak might break his knuckles by law. Ned took the message from the bird's leg with a carefulness that told Davos the hand had done such work more often than most lords would admit. He broke the wax with his thumb. His eyes made a small motion. "From Varys," he said, and the name was a flavor Davos did not love. "The queen knows we have the river. She has Joffrey in the throne room already, circlet upon his head. Renly has fled the city with the Knight of Flowers. The city watch holds under Janos Slint for the moment, but the gold is turning. Lord Peter's coin can buy brave men's wives' shoes. Varys says the alchemists awake." Stannis' mouth drew down into a mark that was not surprise. "Wildfire," he said. "A coward's weapon. A fire's weapon," Davos said out of the memory of hot green in tales and the whisper of sailors who had sailed closer to old Valyria than sense demanded. "Better to name the thing than find your hair gone and your skin black because pride kept your tongue still. If they're wise, they'll see it ready in casks. If they're foolish, they'll trust it. It doesn't love trust." Ned Stark's eyes were on the hill. 2 hours, he said again, to himself or to the promise he had made the city. It will be enough or it will not. He went ashore at the river gate with only 4 men. There were hundreds ready to go with him, and half of them would have died to be named in a song for it. He chose 4 because a man made heavier by lead sinks. One of those 4 wore a brown hood and moved with a cat's balance, and Davos knew the man must be a northern killer or a sellsword bought by the day. The city had both. Stannis went with the hand, the law in him a visible thing. The watch commander met them under the shadow of the gatehouse, where a little chapel to the mother watched the river as if water could remember mercy. Janos Slint had been woken at last. He came thick-necked and sullen-eyed, with the roughness of anger in him tamped down by caution. The gold cloaks made a ring, and the men atop the wall looked down with that ancient human desire to be somewhere else when a knife was being whetted. "I have the writ," Ned Stark said, and held up the parchment like a poor man holds up his last coin. Not in show, but in the frankness of truth. The seal was broken, because Robert's hand had died with him. "I have more than a writ. I have proof, and I will bring it to the small council at noon. I will not be turned from the hall by armed men. If the city watch denies the hand council, the city will be lawless before sunset, and you will have sacked yourselves on a lie. You bring ships against the royal harbor," Janos Slint returned, plucking courage out of the air like a flea. "You break the peace." Stannis' stare chewed the man down to gristle. "A Lannister peace," he said. "I do not break such things. I mend what is laws." Ned Stark's voice was gentler, but only because the place in him that could be harsh had been broken in some winter and never entirely remade. "Captain Slint," he said, "I'll say this once with patience. I do not bring ships against King's Landing. I bring the king's ships back to his brother and to the truth. I will not fight the city watch. I will not see King's Landing burned. Send word with me to the Red Keep that the queen must bring her son to the small council chamber at noon. She will be safe there, and so will he, provided no sword is bared. The realm must hear what I know. And if I refuse you?" Janos demanded. He puffed his chest on the last word as if he were the man deciding whether the tide should rise. "You will force me to choose a sharper road," Ned said, and though his voice never lifted above the breath of the gate's chapel candles, a man on the wall crossed himself. "And you will force the river to turn against the city and your bellies with it. And you will force the men you command to remember that they swore their swords to a crown, not a lion." He paused, the Lord of Winterfell's patience turning in him like a slow wheel. "Ask yourself who will come to your house when this is done if you make the wrong peace today." Janos Slint was not a man bred for such arithmetic. His eyes went to the ships, to the black lines Davos had drawn against his gate, to the banners that meant something even to a man who wanted his dinner and no trouble. He spat to the side, as if he could rid his mouth of the bad taste of duty, and nodded once. "I'll keep the gate," he said, "for 2 hours. For your noon. No more." "Enough," Stannis said. "As you say," Ned told him, and there was no servant's bend in it, only the sound of men who needed one another and would not soften themselves for the sake of courtesy. They walked away together toward the waiting boat, past the mother's chapel whose candles were stuttering. A woman in a blue shawl stood at the threshold with a child on her hip that had not chosen any of this. She looked at Ned Stark as if he had the weather in his hands. Davos had seen men look at Stannis like that when hunger made night white around the edges. He had never seen a woman look at a man of law with hope. Men learn things on rivers they never learned at courts. By the time the boat slid back under the galley's flanks, the city had grown a new noise, the rumor of a thing that could not be true and was. As Davos set them aboard, a half-dozen dories shot out from alleys along the banks, each with 2 or 3 men and a torch and an idea. Mathos put a moon's worth of fear into one of them merely by letting the captured galley's prow drift toward them with the slow inevitability of a cathedral falling. And the men on the skiff decided their idea was foolish, and folded it away with their torches under their cloaks and rowed for the safety of some other tavern's lies. Another dory was slower to think and quicker to brag. Allard threw up a shield and their first firepot smashed against it in a hiss like hell. The tar tried to catch, but the river decided it still owned the world, and green flame spat once and died with a fitful sigh. Davos watched that green like a man watching a remembered shadow walk into a room. "Alchemists," he said. "Helene the pyromancer will be wetting his lips this morning. I will put them under lock before noon," Stannis answered, and there was no passion in it, only arithmetic. "You will put no one under lock that does not first hear the truth," Ned said from his place beside the mizzen. "Even pyromancers." "Especially pyromancers," Stannis said, which was the closest thing he offered to agreement. When the sun broke, it did so half-heartedly, a pale yolk leaking out between sword blade clouds. The city's stink rose with it, dunghills and hot stone and the thick breath of 10,000 fires. Banners along the walls struggled to choose a wind. Davos had men along the decks with shields for any bowman who woke with their courage intact. A thin line of sailors in gold cloaks watched from the pier, eaten by the vastness of the river. The galleys rode like cats along a sill, muscle-ready and patient. In the lull that follows any first daring, men began to remember they were human. Someone laughed. Someone wept. Someone made water against a barrel and apologized to it as if it were a better thing than he. Davos crossed to where Ned Stark stood alone with his thoughts, and for a moment he was just a smuggler again, easing up beside a lord with something to sell besides onions. "My lord," he said, respectful and plain, "there'll be men in that red keep who think you've come to trade steel at dawn." Ned's mouth warmed to something like humor. "There are men in that red keep who think all trades are for steel or flesh. I've come to trade the truth." "Just so," Davos said. "But truth is cold fare on an empty stomach. Your girl, if she is still within, the queen will hold her as a warmer dish." Eddard's face turned a fraction, and because Davos had lived at sea where wind and current turn a world with the slightest thing, he saw that fraction as if it were a blow. "Arya is with her dancing master," Ned said, and the word dancing held the pride a man gives his child when he cannot yet give safety. "Sansa is at court. If I move wrong today, I harm them both." "You've moved honest," Davos said, because he believed it and had learned after poor nights that believing a good thing aloud was a kind of spell that sometimes worked. "Honest movements scare thieves. You've already half won." Ned looked at him, and Davos understood at last how the North taught its sons to measure a man without scales. "Ser Davos," the hand said. "Davos," Davos corrected, because he would not wear Ser upon a night like this, and because Stannis had always used the plain form, and he was tired of pretending that the thing he was mattered less than what he did. "Davos," Ned said again, "if this goes badly, get Arya to Dragonstone. Get her to sea if you must. Get her to White Harbor if you can. Tell Wyman Manderly my word goes with her, and I will hold his faith with ships when I can. Tell my lady wife. Tell her." He broke off then, because a man is not a raven, and there was no sense loading down a mouth with more than it could carry. "Tell her I did not stop trying. I will do what my hands can do," Davos said simply. He had meant it before he spoke it, which was the only way he knew to mean things. Stannis had been watching them with that measuring stillness of his. "I will not let the queen hold your daughter hostage to treason," he said. because in Stannis' tongue treason meant the lie they shared about blood and hair and the odd arithmetic of seed and stone. I am not Robert. I will not soothe lions for the sake of peace. I do not wish you to be Robert, Ned Stark said, and Davos forgave him for the unkindness in it because it had no malice. I wish you to be king. At mid-morning, 4 riders came down from the gate of the gods, bringing with them the suggestion of order that horses imply. They wore no sigils on their cloaks, but their swords had the particular steel of men who believe a certain lady in a certain tower was born for them alone. The lead rider lifted a hand. "My lords," he said, because he recognized both faces and had good sense. "The queen says she will receive the hand in the throne room at noon with whatever witnesses he pleases." He did not say, "The queen commands." Men heard the difference, and the difference made ripples like a fish in a still pool. "Whatever witnesses," Stannis repeated later, as if tasting something to see if it had rotted. "She believes herself cunning." "She believes I am not," Ned replied. "We will prove her wrong together." He chose his witnesses as a man chooses tools for the making of a bridge. Barristan the Bold came because when you ask honor to walk into a room, it comes or admits what it is. Pycelle waddled because a man does not deny a summons when it might lead to safety. Peter Baelish arrived with pockets full of options. Varys slid in as if he had never been born anywhere else. Renly had indeed gone. His absence hung at the back of the hall like a brighter light was shining elsewhere, and you had missed the angle needed to see it. The small folk who were permitted to stand near the pillars were the smell of the city. Sweat and soap and flowers and fear. Janos Slint stood with a double file of gold cloaks like a promise that no promise would be needed, and his mouth had the thin twist of a man calculating which way the coin would roll so he could call it his intention. Cersei sat with Joffrey upon the Iron Throne. The throne hated boys and women. It had cut kings and queens and would after today. But for now Joffrey was too small and too proud and too loved by his mother to know he bled. Cersei wore Lannister crimson, and her hair was a gold that hurt the eyes under the morning's shards of sun. Her smile made the air colder. "My lords," she said, and her voice was the wine in a cask you had kept by for a winter. "You bring the river into the throne room. I hope you will not flood the tiles." Ned Stark bowed the shape required and no more. Stannis did not bend. Davos stood where he had been placed and did not try to be a man different from what he was. For all the marbles' scorn. "The king is dead," Ned Stark said. "I have his letter." He held it up and read it, because there was no music in the words, only iron. He spoke of the protector of the realm. He spoke of Joffrey's youth and the need to hold for the rightful heir. He did not speak the name of the heir, because a letter had not known hair and seed. Then he raised another thing, a book from a boy's hands, a heavy prettiness of a thing that mattered for the truths it carried in its lines. "This is a work of Jon Arryn's hand," Ned said. "My lord was a patient man. He put his patience to paper." He opened to the page and read the line that mattered, and the next, tracing them with his finger like a man mapping a shore. "Black of hair, black of hair, black of hair. Robert's seed." The book had no poetry, and truth needs little. Cersei's smile frayed. "A maester's prattle about seed and stone," she said. "A baker's guess at flour. Jon Arryn died because he forgot that the city runs on coin and fear and love, not on ink." Stannis stood and said, "The queen's children are not the king's," and his words struck the room like a hammer upon a bell that had not rung this century. The gold cloaks were not statues. A man flinched. Another peered at his captain. Barristan Selmy did not move at all, because a rock does not shift when the waves speak their piece. "Those are words to give a woman to the stranger," Cersei said. There was no tremor in her, which made her more dangerous to those who had never seen a she-wolf in the birthing bed. Her eyes were colder than the throne. "Take care what blade you draw in the throne room, Lord Stannis." "I do not draw any blade," Stannis said. "I draw law. The boy on that chair is not the king. I claim the crown as Robert's brother and legitimate heir." He turned his head half an inch toward Barristan. "Sir, you took a vow to the rightful king." Barristan's white cloak made a breath. His eyes did not leave Joffrey's profile, which looked like a Lannister coin struck too hard. "I did," he said, and the silence did something heavy. Changed nothing in that instant. It changed everything that would follow. "Gold cloaks," Joffrey shouted, and his voice cracked against the blades behind him. "Seize them! Seize the traitors!" The first soldier who moved did not know he had made a choice before his body made it for him. He had a wife who depended upon Lord Peter's coin, and a babe whose shoes needed replacing, and a memory of Lannister men with silk purses. His spear came up. Another man put a hand upon it. Janos Slynt's face had sweat upon it, and pride swelled his throat. "In the name of King Joffrey," he made his mouth say, and then his eyes landed upon Petyr Baelish, who looked at him as if he were a debt not worth collecting, and then upon Lord Eddard, who looked at him as if he were a debt to the realm. Janos Slynt was not the sort of man to pay a noble debt when a cheaper one was within reach. "Seize them," he repeated, and the room turned into a 30-year argument that men usually have with swords in the mud. But the gold cloaks did not surge forward as one. Some moved toward Stannis and Ned. Some moved toward the doors to keep them or to flee by them. Varys sank to one side with the grace of a curtain turned to silk. Peter's hand disappeared into his sleeve and came out empty, which was worse than if it had come out with a knife. Pycelle groaned like a badly oiled hinge. Cersei rose as if she were being called to a dance with someone she had always wanted to stab. Davos had stood along the wall with no weapon drawn, because he did not swagger weapons where gods and kings could see him. But he had one in his boot because he had been born with nothing and learned what boot and weapon meant to survival. He did not move either hand. Movement makes men look, and eyes call steel. Barristan moved. He did not move toward the hand, nor toward the queen, nor toward the boy. He moved toward the line of gold cloaks with such awful slowness that for 3 heartbeats the men there felt they had not yet been condemned. Then he drew his blade and set it across the shaft of the nearest spear, and with a flick of his wrist, he broke the wood like a winter twig and sent the iron head leaping away. The crack was loud in the stone hall. "The king's guard serves the king," he said, and turned his head at last, a white ghost showing Joffrey his eyes. "Tell me his name, and I will serve him." Joffrey did not know that he had been forced to answer a question he was too young to understand. Cersei knew. She stepped down 2 steps of the dais. "Ser Barristan," she said, and her voice gentled dangerously. "You stand against the crown?" "I stand for it," Barristan replied, and it was a humiliation to Cersei that he had made her say the next thing. She did not. Ned Stark took the step for them both. "Joffrey is not the king," he said into the room like a prayer. "He is Queen Cersei's son by her brother Jaime. The rightful king is Stannis Baratheon." There were swords moving now. There was a scream somewhere in the stands, and a man in a gray cloak lifted his head and cried, "Seed is strong," like a prayer that had taken too much wine. It broke the tension in a way laughter breaks a funeral. Some men moved as if waking. Others froze as if remembering dreams. "Seize them," Cersei said again, very softly. And at last the first faithful men answered her with their bodies, because the faithful always arrive last. The white of Barristan's cloak flashed once and then was red along the hem. Janos Slynt's men surged and broke and surged. It might have gone as it went in a different world, if a horn had not sounded in the yard, and if the sound of marching had not fallen into the hall from the open doors like a new kind of weather. Men turned because sound is a general, and then they saw the stag and the wolf together, and the gold cloaks line failed in the middle the way rope frays where it is rubbed too often against the same stone. Stannis' men had come through the river gate with a letter and a promise and the weight of ships beyond their backs. They did not cut down any man who dropped his spear and stepped back. They did not pause for boasts. They held their shields and pushed where shields needed to be, and a chunk of the hall turned into a channel men could flee through. Sound changed from orders to confusion to choice. Cersei's hand went to Joffrey's shoulder. She leaned to say something into his ear. The boy tore his shoulder away, a princess's huff on a king's chair, and shrieked, "I am the king!" into the noise, which let all the listening men hear that he was not. Janos Slynt was hauled backward by his own guards as Stannis' men made a ring. Petyr Baelish vanished like dye in a barrel. Varys appeared upon the far side of the room, speaking to a boy with black hair and a scar along his cheek. Davos saw that detail and remembered it, because details keep men alive. "Lady Sansa," Cersei said, though no one had spoken of Ned's oldest, and that was a clever little cut in a room full of axes. "Sansa Stark," she said louder, and in that new quiet the name turned men's heads. She had a gift for it. "Will be sent her father's fingers one by one if any man touches my son." It was a lie that might become truth in the mouths of men like Janos Slynt. It was also the only weapon she had left that would cut Ned Stark down where he stood without the room calling it murder. Ned's face did something too small for the room to notice and too large for Davos to ever forget. He did not look at Stannis. He did not look at Cersei, who searched his eyes as if she could finally find herself forgiven in another person's ruin. He looked at Barristan Selmy. "Sire," he said, "go to the queen with me. Take the boy. No one must be harmed." The old knight's jaw tightened. He nodded once and moved, and if Cersei had had a knife, she could have ended her life there and perhaps saved her son's soul. She did not. She had only men, and their souls were as slippery as eels. What happened next could have been a slaughter. It might yet become one upon another day. That day it was something else, a breaking of breath. Gold cloaks yielded because their captain had been displaced. Stannis' men did not press their advantage because Stannis had told them he wanted order alive. Ned Stark walked to the dais as if he were going to a grave where he would be forgiven. Cersei took her son's hand because it was still a son's hand and not a king's. Davos stood out of the way because none of this used him until it used him very much. "Your Grace," Ned said, and it was the last time he would ever say it to a Lannister boy. "Come down from there." Joffrey's mouth made a shape and would have made a sound, but Cersei's fingers tightened until his bones remembered being a baby. She rose with him. She made him place his feet upon the steps as if this were a dance and they had rehearsed. She would never forgive Eddard Stark for taking her son's hand from the iron, nor forgive herself for not finding knives faster, nor forgive the world for being what it was. She did not forgive easily. She did not forgive at all. By noon, the Iron Throne stood empty under a stained-glass sun. The small council were gathered in a smaller chamber where tapestries could not do much to stop the noise of a city learning new words for the same fears. Stannis sat not at the head, for he would not sit as king yet. He sat at the side with Ned as if the two of them built a scaffold and would not look at one another as they did. Varys spoke of bread. Pycelle spoke of propriety and gout. Peter Baelish spoke of coin in a way that charmed no one now that banners had climbed masts downriver. Barristan stood. Cersei did not. "Lord Stannis," Ned said finally, when the recitation of what the city required had drowned itself in its own froth, "we must send for the High Septon and the Lords of the Realm." "To do what?" Peter asked, with smiling malice so light it might have been perfume. "To witness the realm tear itself apart more tidily? I admire a neat ledger as much as any man, but there is something to be said for accounting after a transaction, not before." "Go home, Littlefinger," Stannis said, the words spare as a starving winter. "Count your coin. Count it quickly. You have little time before I ask whose coin you counted and for whom." Peter's eyes sparked. "I have always counted for the realm," he said with a grace that would not save him forever. "But I will do as I am bidden, your Lord Stannis." "Send for the High Septon," Ned repeated. "We will give him the book and the truth inside it, and let him call the lords to hear it. Not to vote upon it," he added, because he knew Stannis well enough by now to place his words between stones where they could not slip. "To hear it. And if they do not care for hearing," Stannis said, "will you ask them whether they prefer their lies boiled or baked?" "I will ask them whether their sons should marry lies," Ned said, and the heat that lived under his words had the flatness of snow squall. "It will be harder for them to lie then." Davos wanted to be back on the river, where men's lies were shorter and you could see them coming by the splash they made in water. He went to the door and spoke low to the runner there. "Tell Lord Stannis' men to pull 3 galleys across the mouth of the muddy way so no boats pass out. No fires. No oars. Just be seen." The boy went with that little quickness only children summon when the world turns upside down and they realize there is no point in trusting it to turn back. By evening, it was known in the streets in the way all things are known there. Wrong and right in equal portions, with a generous covering of the wrongest. The Lannister boy had been pulled off the throne by the wolves. The Baratheon with the long face had taken the city and would burn it if anyone sneezed. The Hand had seized the ships because his daughter was held at sword point. The queen had fled to the maze of her own palace with wine and wolves at her door. There was a red witch at Dragonstone who ate men's tongues and could set the water on fire with her eyes. Davos smiled at that one ruefully, not because it was true, but because it made more sense than the truth usually did. Arya Stark had not come to the gate at noon, though Davos had put a man with quick feet and a thief's heart to wait with a boat in the shadows of the Pier of Fish. Instead, at dusk a man in a foreign hat came out of an alley with a bundle under his arm that fought and protested. The man's smile was a knife's reflection. "There you are," Syrio Farrell said. "If men can be rightly named by the way they carry their heads." He set the bundle down. Arya Stark sprang out and kicked him in the shin and then threw herself at the water with a kind of furious sobbing that made Davos see she was very much a child. "Come, little cat," the Braavosi murmured, gentling the edge of everything. "Not so fast that you fall in." Davos had a handout and a practical mind. A cloak, a crust, a clean way aboard that was not poetry. He put her in the belly of Black Betha with 2 women who could be tender without permission and told them she was a fisher's niece and the daughter of the mother and not to ask more than that. He sent Syrio away with a purse because Davos had always believed a man deserved coin for doing a dangerous thing even if he did it for love or pride, and because paying a man for saving a girl's life felt like the kind of blasphemy gods might forgive. "She kicked like a cat and cut like one," the Braavosi said, rubbing his shin and grinning. "If you take her to the sea, she will think she is home, though she has never seen it." He looked at Davos with eyes that had survived odd weather. "And you are a smuggler with an honest face. It will confuse men. They will not suspect you are dangerous." "I am not," Davos said. "The men I bring are dangerous enough." He watched Arya bury her face in the cloak and not cry like a lady, only breathe too hard like a boy who has run and fallen and knows he must get up again. "I will take her to Dragonstone," he said. "You will take her to the world," Syrio replied, and went into the fog with his hat at an angle that suggested he would rather dance than fight, but would do either with the same grace. That night, while the city seethed and the Red Keep drew its own belly in to keep its organs from falling out, Davos put Black Betha to the river's mouth with her lanterns hooded and her men thinking small and quiet thoughts. He did not ask the galleys waiting off the muddy way to move. He nosed around them with ease learned in smuggling years, and they did not interfere because the men on them understood he did his lord's work, and because they had sense enough to fear a man who could slide by them without touching or to water. The open sea opened like a wound beyond the mouth of the river, blacker than night and less honest. Arya came up twice to breathe and look at the emptiness and decided it suited her. She went below without complaint. A man does not ask more of a child on such a night. Dragonstone rose from the sea at dawn like a beast with wings caught in rock, a castle that remembered dragons under its skin. The great fortress had been Stannis's keep because Robert did not love grim places, and it wore Stannis's name as if it had always been waiting for it. Davos had known the harbor in a smuggler's way, by its shoals and its bribes. To come under the lee with banners out and men to cheer instead of curse was a fatter pleasure than he liked to admit. He sent Arya ashore with a letter for Maester Cresson, who had known Stannis since the man had been a lonely boy full of stone and need. The Maester came down with his back curved like an old question mark and took the girl's hand the way a father would if he had ever been allowed to be gentler with his lord. "We are without a lady in this hall," Cresson said. "We will remedy it with bread and a fire. Do not let her see pity," Davos warned, not because he knew the inside of Arya's head, but because he knew how pity clanged upon a child who wanted steel. "She'll take meat and truth better. We shall give her both," the old man agreed. Melisandre was there as well, though she stood back in the hall's deeper shadows, as if the red silk needed darker things to make its own flame. Her eyes were a sea in a storm at night, darker than men told their wives later, brighter than they told themselves. She smiled at Davos, and he felt the heat of a fire that had not yet been lit on his old scars. "You bring a fierce little bone to the Lord of Light," she said. "I bring the Lord's hand's daughter to his brother's hall," Davos returned, trying politeness first, as if it were a thick cloak against weather one could not name. "And food and safety by God as is only decent." "Decency is a small god," Melisandre said, smiling with each word. "But he keeps good tables." She looked at Arya Stark and at something else around her that Davos could not see and did not wish to. "The world is changing. Blood changes it." She looked at Davos. "Your fingers changed it once. They will again." "Any man can change the world," Davos said gruffly, "if he brings enough onions to a siege." The hall laughed, though no one had made a joke. Laughter clings to a place like smoke even when there is no fire to make it. Stannis came 2 days later, on a ship with a bleak prow and a deck full of men who hated cheer. He had kept King's Landing under his thumb those 2 days with law and the threat of hunger and the presence of ships where ships ought to be when a city learns to behave. The High Septon had come to the Red Keep with sweat upon his lip and handkerchiefs in both sleeves, and he had touched the book with fingers that trembled not from age but because truth lifts weights no muscle can prepare for. Varys had sent ravens that did not get shot. Peter had sent porters to carry things that were not his out of rooms that had been his to count. Cersei had locked herself in a set of chambers and had spoken to no one whose name did not begin with Ser and end with a sword. Joffrey had learned what a cold chair felt like and had cried into his bed with the muffled stubbornness of a boy who intends to get everything back when the moment's meanness passes. Ned had slept badly and rewritten the letters to Winterfell 3 times, settling upon truth each time and not the comfort that wanted to be written in its place. When Stannis stepped into Dragonstone's hall and saw Arya Stark at its long table with bread in her hand and a cup of watered wine beside it, his mouth made a line. "You negate a queen's threat," he said, which was how Stannis confessed gratitude. "I negated a mother's lie," Davos said roughly, which was how he forgave himself for not having been quick enough to bring 2 girls, not 1. "Lady Sansa remains at court," Ned said. He had come to Dragonstone at once, leaving Ser Barristan and a dozen things with too much weight upon too few shoulders behind him, like a man leaving a house with a fire in the rafters to fetch water that could not come by any other road. He looked older on the sea and younger in hall away from the weight of the Iron Throne. The sea does strange arithmetic to men's ages. She writes that she is well. There are words in the letter that are not hers, he added, because truth is precise to the point of cruelty. "We will trade for her," Stannis said, because he believed things could be traded and because it comforted him to say so in a hall where dragons watched from stone. "We will trade order. We will trade a city not burned for a girl not harmed. We will trade the crown for Lannister heads if we must. We will trade lies for truth. We will do these trades until there are fewer lies left to barter." "You will have to trade with Renly as well," Ned observed. "He has the Tyrells. He has the reach. He will want what is not his." "He wants songs," Stannis said, and there was a weariness in it that was not ungenerous, merely honest. "He will take them. He will not take my crown." "Bring him a peace," Ned suggested. "You bring the law. Let him bring bread. Let him bring marriages. Let him keep Storm's End if pride is a thing you can afford, and he will feel himself lord enough not to cause trouble." Stannis looked not at Ned, but at the dragons above the table, as if they might offer words worth keeping. "He must kneel," he said finally. "He will not," Ned returned. "Then he must die," Stannis said, and the cold law spoke in him, the thing that had always saved him and always broken him and never amounted to a balance a generous man could carry. "Not yet," Ned said. The ravens flew, invitations in the shape of commands, commands in the shape of mercy, mercy written with iron in its ink. Lords read them. Some said prayers for the chance to go back to their chickens. Some buckled on swords. Some counted how many sons they could afford to lose for a small place at the right table. In the Riverlands, fires burned where Lannister raiders had been let off their leashes earlier by Tywin, who had never met a leash he trusted unless it led a lion. In Winterfell, A boy named Robb Stark stood at a window where his father had once stood and looked south and told himself that stillness was a kind of murder. Catelyn Tully held one boy's hand and let go of another in her heart and told the gods she would forgive them for nothing if they made her pay for the lie that sons should stay children. At the Eyrie, Lisa Arryn fed her son sweets and would not taste the bitter that the world had become. In Highgarden, Marjorie Tyrell smiled into a mirror at a face the realm wanted and knew where to press it. Renly came to Storm's End with banners enough to shade the road from Bitterbridge and laughter enough to make it seem easy. Stannis stood upon the wall and did not smile. Ned rode between them on a horse that did not like the wind and carried more hope than he liked to admit. Davos stood at the flank, where a man could measure, beyond the reach of the honed words men cast at one another from saddles. The brothers looked at one another with a kind of injury shaped like childhood. The wall between them was old. Ned's voice made bridges none of them would cross. "You were meant to be two hands," he said once, before courtesies broke and the old blood came filling everything like spring melt. Storm's End stone and the laugh that makes winter think twice. They did not hear him. Renly wanted music. Stannis wanted truth. The realm wanted bread and safety. You cannot feed a realm on laughter alone, Davos thought. You cannot make a law love you. They parted without knives, which was a victory that felt like drowning slower than yesterday. Renly sent bread to King's Landing because in his heart he did not wish small folk to suffer for Stannis' stubbornness, and because Marjorie counseled the move and Renly wanted to show the realm that Loras had chosen more than swordplay. Stannis took the bread because law does not forbid eating in a storm. The city breathed a little easier. Cersei spat out the crusts and planned where she would put wildfire so that when the day came men would say Stannis burned the city and she had only watched. Peter kept a ledger of men who owed him favors and of men he would owe. Varys sent one last bird to one last friend whose name would never be known and then put the bird to the torch because secrets have to be burned to be true. It was not to be a single battle. If the realm had had mercy, perhaps it would have been. Instead there came a summer of sieges begun and lifted, of riders wearing the wrong colors down the right roads and being forgiven because their sacks held crayfish and bread. The Red Keep learned what it was to watch the river with longing and fear. The alchemists worked in deeper cellars under closer guard and counted casks like old men count sins. The City Watch grew used to carrying out Stannis' will with Ned Stark's hand upon its shoulder and Barristan Selmy's eyes upon its back. Sansa wrote letters that told a mother nothing and everything, and sang in the sept when asked and cried only into her pillow and afterward made fast her face like her father had taught her to make fast a strap on her saddle. Arya learned every stair in Dragonstone that led to nowhere and every face that could be turned aside by a girl who did not wish to be a lady. She learned where the kitchens hid the knives and how a hall sounded when men had made decisions that would quiet the world for a month and then unquiet it for a year. Tywin Lannister drew his lions around him and trained them on maps. He had never needed to think about the sea. Now he was forced to. He chewed the thought like gristle. He sent men to try the garrison at Duskendale and men to speak in whispers at the Blackwater and men to carry sacks that were not all filled with grain. The Tyrells smiled and did not move their fleet as far as Tywin wanted, because Renly was their green, and their wine tasted better when the cup matched the cloth. The Iron Islands stirred in their beds at the sound of ships moving and thought about theft with the lazy lust of a man who believes the law has gone off to a war where it will not quickly return. And in the middle of this great slow dance, something hard and human went right that often goes wrong. The High Septon stood upon the steps of Baelor's September in plain white and read the words from the book as if they were scripture where men needed scripture. He named the seed and the stone. He named Jaime Lannister brother and father at once. He did not call for stoning. He did not call for tearful prayers. He called for confession, which is the word law uses for mercy and mercy uses for law. Men's mouths fell open and shut. Some spat, some blessed. It was as if a wind had changed at last to blow in from a place where the air was cleaner. Cersei did not confess. She gathered her children and did a thing she had not done since she was a child herself. She went to her father. Tywin met her on the road with an army at his back and a black humor behind his eyes. He had never forgiven the world for not giving him sons who were simple to use. He told Cersei to sit in her tent and be proud and quiet and bear his weight like a lady. She did not. She wrote letters and sent them on swift horses, and one of them found a bastard boy in the Riverlands who meant nothing to anyone and told him his blood would be death to a king. He kept his head down and was not found. Another letter waited for a red woman's eyes and came to ash in her hands while she smiled. And because the realm is a wheel that knows neither prayer nor pity, there came a morning when Stannis stood upon the Blackwater again with Davos at his shoulder and the fleet he had saved and captured making a sound like 100 drums. The city had eaten its bread and found it wanted law next. The chain had not been raised. Tyrion had not been hand to set it, and the wildfire casks waited under their green oil for a match that would not be thrown that day. Barristan sat a horse with white on his shoulders and watched the gate. Janos Slynt watched the river with dislike like a man considers the ocean that stole his father. Ned stood upon the prow of the first galley with ice at his back. The Valyrian steel returned to his keeping by a just as sweet as it was heavy. He would not draw it on a city. The blade was a man for another road. He wore it the way a man wears his own name. The bells did not ring as they had once rung when Lannister gold paid for their tongues to dance to a different song. They swung dull and patient. The fleet moved like a purpose made of wood and rope. The first arrows fell and fell short. The first grapnels flew and caught. Men shouted because men shout in every century when they see their lives turn toward danger that might also be a better life. The gold cloaks at the gate looked at one another and remembered 2 hours when a man had given them a choice and told them they would not be punished for taking it. The Red Keep did not burn that day. The city did not drown. Renly did not bring his host to break his brow. Though he came near enough that his banners looked like a garden along the left bank. He watched a while, and when he saw the stag and the wolf upon the mastheads, he smiled a little and turned his horse and said something into Marjorie's ear that made her laugh as if the world could be made with laughter after all. He took his men back to Storm's End and wrote a letter with more respect in it than he had ever sent to Stannis before. Cersei did not watch. She sat in a chair in a tent beyond Tywin's array and wrapped her hands in her hair until it hurt and told herself that pain is the shape of love and that she could still make the world pay for the shape it had made her take. Joffrey sulked and threatened and cried, and then made himself cold in ways that would make him unkillable by kindness for such time as he lived. Jaime Lannister laid his head back against a wagon wheel and grinned at the sky because sometimes the only man you can forgive in the world is yourself. When the gates of King's Landing opened, they opened because men had decided they would rather walk out alive than be heroes. They opened because the High Septon had read a book like a prayer. They opened because Janos Slynt had once looked into Eddard Stark's eyes and seen a thing that made his own smallness hurt in a way he could not hide from. They opened because Stannis Baratheon had made a choice one dawn to trust a smuggler, and because Davos Seaworth had moved his hands upon oars and ropes and the world had moved in the only way the world can, a finger's breadth at a time. Ned walked through the river gate with ice upon his back and a face that had made winter less proud for 40 years. Stannis walked beside him with his mouth a line and his eyes on the hill and his mind already adding. Barristan walked before them, a white river flowing across stone. The small folk watched, and some jeered, and some blessed, and most simply remembered where their bread had come from yesterday. The city smelled of 1,000 suppers wanting. At the foot of the hill Stannis stopped. He looked up at the palace that had housed lies and law and the odd moments of mercy that men mistake for godhood. He looked at the banners. He looked at the sky, which did not care what any of them did. He used his mouth for what it was meant for in such times. "Let us go and make an honest kingdom," he said. Ned nodded once and felt in his bones that he had not betrayed the better parts of himself to do a necessary thing. He had done what he could. He would go on doing it, and it would not be enough, and it would be more than most men managed, and the gods would make their own poor sums and call the total a life. He thought of Sansa, and he thought of Arya, and he thought of a weirwood's face in winter. He went up the hill with the weight of steel at his back and the weight of a river under his feet, and the city did not fall that day, and the ships at anchor turned very slowly upon their ropes in the tide until noon was past and the sun lifted high enough to show what men had done in its sight. By evening, the Iron Throne had cut another man and another man had refused to bleed, which is all history is when you strip it. Stannis sat upon it at last, and felt its blades with his legs and did not flinch, And somewhere in the palace, a small boy learned that he was not a king, and a small girl learned that a kingdom could change and not consume her whole. Davos sat at a table in a common room near the fish market with a wooden bowl of stew and a cup with no wine in it, and thought of onions and sails, and how men who cannot be bought are the only men worth counting on, and considered himself not special for being one of them. The realm did not heal overnight. It never does. The Riverlands still burned in patches. The Tyrells still wanted songs. Tywin Lannister still wanted his pride whitewashed by victory. But the ships rode peaceably in the Blackwater under a sky that did not glow green, and the bells did not call the stranger into a city of ashes. Men walked and cursed as they will. Women bore and buried as they must. And in a hall of dragonstone and shadow by the sea, a girl with tangled hair and knees scuffed black from climbing learned to hold a wooden sword as if it were a way to write her name in the world where no one would mispronounce it again. The Blackwater talked to the keys under a sky rubbed raw by sunset. A gull cried. Davos ran his palm along a railing that had almost burned and had not. The wood was warm. He thought, absurdly, of his first son's first breath. He thought of Stannis' mouth when he allowed himself the smallest, meanest victory of being right. He thought of Lord Eddard Stark's steady eyes in a fog and feared that such eyes do not survive such work often. He turned when footsteps came. Ned stood with him at the rail, ice glimmering faint behind his shoulder like the last of the day's cold. They watched the water without speaking. The river gave them the courtesy of not drowning their thoughts. "Tomorrow we reckon with the Lannisters," Stannis had said and would say again until there were none to reckon with or the reckoning had exhausted itself. "Tomorrow we reckon with the Ironborn. Tomorrow we make men remember the law. Tomorrow," Davos said aloud, softly, to the river, and the river answered the way rivers always do, by going on. He looked at Eddard Stark and saw a man who would walk into tomorrow like a road he did not choose and never regret the stepping. It was a good thing to hold a fleet at anchor under such a man's watch, and Davos permitted himself the smallest of sinful comforts. He believed that for a while, at least, the realm might be less cruel than it had been, also because men had remembered how to be better than their banners. Above them, from the hill, a bell spoke a single steady tone. It was not the sound of victory. It was the sound of order. It was enough. The ships lifted and fell in their chains. The men on the quays spat and laughed and went home to their bread. The night came in, as nights do upon every story whether men have finished telling it or not, and the Blackwater wore it like a thing it had been made to carry, and the city did not burn.